So, all right. So I thought to start that we could just create some like 2 word clouds together to kind of get the ideas flowing and start to remember what we read about
Love it.
or watched on TED Talks or however. And while I have a few questions to kind of start the conversation, I would love for anybody to throw out ideas or parts of the book that really spoke to you, or like how it connects to your own life or people that you interact with. So if y'all just want to hop over to menti.com, I threw the link in the chat. It's menti.com. And then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if I can. And do you see a white screen that says home right now?
Yes.
It's working. So then on menti.com, you can put in the code, which is 3412949. Spaces, I believe, are irrelevant. And then from there, you can just start populating it with things that the word home speaks to for you. So what defines home? How do you place home? If you want to put in a multi-word idea, just link the words with an underline, an underscore or a tilde. Otherwise, it'll show up as like 5 different words. So, and then it should just auto-populate, I'm hoping. So we'll see what comes up.
How do you connect the 2 words? Is it an underline or a dash?
Yeah, it's an underscore.
Okay.
So,
this is really cool. I haven't seen this before.
A lot of people throw in a few more ideas.
It is cool. It's one of those things, the more of these handy tools nowadays we know about, the better. Spice up our virtual meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to like, yeah, if this was a free version, and you can do up to 2. So we're only going to do 2 different word clouds. So the whole discussion won't be word clouds, but I thought it was a pretty cool tool, and it does integrate with PowerPoint. Fun fact. All right, I'll let people throw a few more on there. And then I'm actually gonna grab a picture of this. And then,
oh. I can make a screenshot too with.
Oh yeah, I haven't quite figured that out yet on my Mac. So
I do it with our virtual meetings for work. So
yeah, feel free to grab one. I thought it was cool.
Shift Command 4.
Shift Command 4. Thank you.
Just drag a box over it.
Oh, that's super helpful. Why the 4 is in there, who knows? But
I don't know. That's just the shortcut for 4. And then you can just choose the little.
Oh, you can choose the whatever you want.
Yeah, not the whole screen, just what you want.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so feel free to keep on populating it. One thing we can talk about more is how we define home and what that means for people where it might not be as tangible or where there might not be a physical address for it. When I myself was reading the book, I was thinking a lot about actually students that might have had to end their exchange year early due to COVID, and how they were returning to a home that they weren't planning for, and that looked a lot different than the one they left behind for a lot of reasons. So, all right. Would anyone like to share any thoughts on what home means while we're here?
Okay, I might share something. When my kids were young, kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was sort of in the home renovation or flipping, gig that was popular at the time. So I think I renovated 5 different homes. I didn't swing the hammer, but I did, like I bought the house and I found blah, 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 blah. And through this and through a divorce with my kid's mom and moves on her part and moves on my part, I think the kids figured out one time before they were graduated from high school, they'd lived in 16 different places, including at one point their grandparents' basement and a couple of rental houses and an apartment where Andy was on a blow-up bed. And, all the way from there to a brand new construction house and some of the renovated places. So one of the things that I put in here is it's on the brown under the word mom where you hang the photos. Our family sort of motto is home is where you hang the photos, like home, if you're there and if your photos are there and if the people you love are there, that's home. I think when I've told this story over the years, I think people are astounded or they almost feel sorry, like for the kids, like, ooh, I've literally had people say how terrible that the kids had to move so often. But I think maybe it's kind of like exchange, you just learn that home and love and family they can be anywhere, they don't have to, not necessarily this one spot or, Kirk, I'm thinking a lot about at the moment, the family in your town that you shared with us a couple of weeks ago at the big house fire and all the rest of it, they're still together. They will be in a new spot. It's not the same. It's not what it was, but it'll still be home. It's in transition right now. So anyway, that's one thing to share about home.
I love that. Yeah, I love the idea of hanging photos. That's something I did every time I've moved, is at least bring like a few photos that I tape up in the wall, It's excellent.
And photos being metaphors for just, things that you're familiar with. It doesn't take much of familiar items in a space to really make it feel like home if you're together,
I think, so home related to our book, that made me think of my move to the US. And when did the new country become my home? It takes a while. And it's in different phases too. So of course, I was privileged because I could bring my whole family, my husband and children at the time. So that of course helps. Mean that the entire area is immediately your home. And so that made me think of what we read in the book too, where where these kids move somewhere else and they move in with a family typically, or they move with their family. Yes, they're together and they have that home. And at the same time, everything around them is so different. It takes a little time before that becomes a home. So that's why I wrote some words like belonging and safe, and because at first you don't have that immediately. It takes a little time to build it up and develop those sentiments in your new environment, right?
For sure.
Awesome. So you were an adult when you moved here, Olga?
I was 35.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And how long would you say it took you to, you said, not right away, but was that a matter of 1 year, 5 years, longer?
Oh, probably about half a year, I would say, to start feeling like there were some roots or something, or some understanding of why things happen the way they do. Of course, I moved to a very rural community with its own subculture and rules and habits.
Olga, would you say that you adjusted more quickly than your children?
Oh no, so my children were 8, 6, and 4, and they adjusted much faster. It wasn't their choice. It was ours as parents to decide, let's do this. But younger children, the younger, the easier. Yeah,
Okay.
is what I observed with my children. Of course, there are just individual differences a little bit. Everyone has their own personality, and for some it goes super quick. But at the end of the day, that feeling of, yes, I understand how things work. I belong here. I have some friends, people who know me, that there's that piece of being known and being somewhat understood. The other way around as well, right? So there were those pieces. My youngest, so he was 4, and he still is a fairly quiet person, not a chatty person like his mother, but he went to preschool, and the teacher said, this is most curious. He doesn't talk much. He obviously doesn't speak English yet. And he and his buddy in the classroom, they both look at the toys and they look at each other and they play together.
They play, yeah. Mm.
So the barriers that we have as adults, with not knowing the language or so, it doesn't matter when you're 4, or not for him at least.
I'm amazed that I realize we're digressing, Alka.
That's okay.
I am so amazed, Olga, that you feel it only took 6 months to feel somewhat settled. Gosh, I would think it would, for me, just take longer. And in the book, I was I just kind of got emotional every time I read about moving kids and preparing them and saying goodbye to one culture and hello to the next and how to do that. I mean, all that really hit me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like that it's a big deal. That it's almost as if I want to go get a job with a company and help with relocation. You know, families coming into the area. I mean, there's just a lot to take into consideration for the family to, you know, stay intact and feel loved. I mean, you get the love from the family, but then in the community and the school, the right school, you know, the right people to be in touch with. Anyway.
I love it. So from there, we can kind of go to our next word cloud, which is words that you associate with TCKs or third culture kids. So, and this can also be cross-cultural kids. The book did talk a little bit about the difference, but I would include in here like third culture kids, adult third culture kids, cross-cultural kids. And it's the same code and menti.com. So. And if you're still on home like I am, you just have to click the next question at the bottom.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was like, wait. So keep on populating it if you'd like. For those that have a moment to look up and look at their screens, would anybody share some words that maybe you didn't contribute, but you find are like, oh yeah, that's right, or oh, I wish I had remembered that you're really happy somebody else put up on the word cloud?
The one phrase that I remembered, it was just too many words to put in, but I think this kind of gets to it, is I loved in the one TED Talk, this young man said, I take my difference and make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that.
I really like that. Greg, welcome back. You're welcome to populate the word cloud if you'd like. So you can just go to menti.com and then put up that code that's at the top.
I'm sorry, I'm not following.
We're doing a word cloud with things that we associate with third culture kids. So you're welcome to help populate it if you'd like.
Okay.
By visiting menti.com, menti.com.
Then use that code.
You then use that code.
Okay.
You're also just welcome to jump in and participate however you'd like.
Thank you very much. Sorry for not being here. My boss at the American Speech Institute called, and if she wants to call, she gets to call.
Yeah.
Bosses are like that, you know?
Well, I know you're very familiar with this book because you're one of the people who also recommended it. So I'm sure you can jump right in. Are there any words that people find surprising that are up there?
I found the reference to the word arrogant in the book quite surprising, because as I look at this list, this is an exchange student. I mean, all of it. I mean, this is every kid that goes out, I think, experiences all of this, but arrogance is certainly nothing that I would consider myself to be, having been an exchange student. But, you know, there's some interesting, you know, arrogance, superiority, that whole line of thinking, you know, is in some parts of the book that we're kind of talking about, you know, they people who might feel better or more worldly, or they come back and they're, you know, back with maybe friends in their passport country, as it's described in the book, and they just feel like they've had all these experiences and other people weren't. So I mean, I think for those of us involved in the exchange program, it might be an interesting concept to cover in the future. You know, just be on guard a little bit. Yes, you have this great experience. Yes, you're living and growing and learning a new language, but also, you know, be on guard a bit about maybe going down that path. That was surprising to me. I didn't expect it out of the book.
I think that sometimes people have not had the experience see people who have had the experience being arrogant, when in fact the people who are third culture, they have something more to add.
Mm-hmm.
In my own work with students in Senegal, I've seen a little bit of it when students tend to idealize the host culture, and then they become a little bit arrogant in terms of how they view their own culture or their family's culture back home. And I think that can be played as ignorant or arrogant, especially if they're, I think it's, and also it's a perception, right? So they might not see themselves as arrogant, but the people they're interacting with might. And so I think, John, to your point, you know, talking to students about just being mindful about that you're still on a learning journey, and other people are on a learning journey, and how can you share your points of learning with others rather than lording it over them
as the right way to do something, or right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was a part in the book about, let's say you're an exchange student, you come back, and the complaint, and we hear it all the time, no one will listen to me, you know, I get a minute and then we're on to something else. Mm-hmm. But in the book, that, you know, it cautioned that person, well, did you ask your friend what life's been like for them for the last year?
Mm-hmm.
instead of expecting to always be, you know, hey, I'm the one that was gone. Don't you want to know what I did? Yeah, I think that can come off as very arrogant. And I think in that reverse culture shock period too, when the kids, I mean, I think we all experience it too. We come back and nothing's quite as good in the States as it was where we were living. And I think we can easily come off as arrogant. Like we know everything. We learned a lot that year. Don't you guys know that? Yeah. I mean, there's so much in this book that can be used for rebound orientation.
So much, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
There's a lot.
So much. Really exciting.
I had a question. I haven't finished the book yet, but I had a question. Is there a difference between, because they talk about the impact on developmental age. If a developmental age person has a choice regarding going to the other country, for instance, a business person taking the kids or a diplomat or a missionary taking the kids and going for an extended period of time compared to an exchange student choosing to take a year and go learn about a different culture. And that's the whole purpose of the trip, whether they're going from the US somewhere else or from somewhere else to the US. Is there a difference? Because I've always focused on the positive and how cool that is and think about how the world opens up. And I hadn't really thought about all the trade-offs about home not feeling like home again or where. So have you guys thought about that or talked about, is there a difference between different experiences?
At Rebound Weekend, which often is based upon what Dennis White, no relative to myself, has done, a kid who goes abroad and becomes an exchange student matures at least 5 times more rapidly than the kid who stayed behind. So a kid who goes abroad at 17 might come home as the same maturity as a 22, 23-year-old. But the opposite also takes place, and we do a whole session, or they have done historically at Rebound Weekend, a whole session on the Atlas problem. And if you might recall, Atlas was the Greek god who stood with one foot in the Atlas Mountains in what we now call Morocco, another foot on Gibraltar at the foot of the Mediterranean Sea. And he never was quite at home in Africa, and he's never quite at home in Europe. And that while you go abroad and you do gain this other culture, you're never comfortable any place you go ever again, because you always have one foot somewhere else. You always have some longing for somewhere else to go to. Does that, hopefully that addresses the question.
I think that's an interesting idea too, because the book talked about like delusion of choice and how, for example, like a military brat would feel like they never get the choice, right? Because they can't control where they are. And I think with exchange students, I saw that more in the other side, which is that they can be very spontaneous or say like, I have to do something now because I might not be able to do it tomorrow. And I think that can be really powerful. I mean, there are definitely trade-offs to that, but I think the willingness to jump in is really admirable. And then also with that, I think that now that I, personally feel like I have a home in a lot of different places, sometimes I can fall into delusion of choice because I'd be like, well, I have to stay in Minnesota. I can't just pick up and go to Senegal. Oh, life is terrible. Like, oh my gosh, like I have to stay here. And it's not really like, like I could quit my job and, like there's a lot of choice in that. But this idea that, oh man, like society won't let me. And so I need to like kick myself out of that and say like, okay, well then if you do want to go, when are you going to go? How are you going to get there? So, the man is always stopping me.
Sandy, to your question, I as an exchange student, I was an exchange student to Mexico, 83, 84. As an exchange student, as I read the book, clearly I was seeing my own situation in it. And for all of the similarities that there were to third culture kids, there are some real differences. And I think you put your finger on a huge one. I almost see exchange students more as kind of like the diplomat or the business person themselves who decides, you know, it's a decision, you want to do it, you know what's involved, you're oriented, you know, especially for exchange students, you're going to be there for a year, you're going to go, this is typically what happens, and at the end of the year, you're coming back here, Minnesota or Wisconsin or wherever you're from. Unlike a lot of the stories that were told in the book, Third Culture Kids, about, you know, kids who are kind of along for the ride, not their choice to leave, not their choice to not be able to bring their toys or their friends or their, you know, belongings. You know, and they talked about this for military kids, but really diplomats' kids or business people's, especially business. You know, we want you here for 2 years, and then here for a year, and then here for another 2 years, and the kids just get dragged. I think really big differences with that as compared to, I think you put your finger on something.
And it was the transition out of being a kid to an adult. I think the story was, or example was Erica going back to Singapore, and she couldn't get a job because she couldn't get a visa, and then she couldn't afford to live, and she was now living in an unsafe area, so she didn't feel at home in Singapore, she didn't feel at home in Ohio. So I just wondered, you know, when we're thinking about exchange students who they have a home, they know they're going back. Yeah, I just wondered what the differences were. I hadn't really thought about that yet.
Yeah. What do other people who went on exchange on the call kind of think about that difference between exchange and third culture kids? Were there other big things that stood out? Sorry, okay, I'm jumping.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
Jumping in on your thunder.
I think there's a big difference for the exchange student who goes and lives with a new family as a native family there. You know, as I say to the kids at orientation, either go native or don't go. Or by the kid who's the child of a business person, chances are they're going to go to the American school in that city or the international school in that city. And the kid who goes to as a military brat, he's going to go to the American school on base or whatever it is. And mom and dad are still going to speak English, and mom and dad are still going to understand the American's point of view. I think the exchange student, where you really delve into the foreign culture, I think is kind of a different deal, or so I think anyway.
Yeah, I would agree with Greg's observation there. And when in the book, and I have to confess, I read about the first third part, but so there's all this excitement that I have, and which is why I love this club and everything. And so I tend to see all the positives, while we all know and have experienced that there are there's the flip side of the coin. And so as a parent, I would say, and also being involved with the Youth Exchange Club in Brookings, South Dakota, we had really not a lot of attention for the reverse culture shock for those returning. And that was one thing that you or we in our club have discussed several times in the last year only already. And one thing that makes such a difference, but I've witnessed that grief from some of those youth exchange students. And one thing that was mentioned in the book was about how you can become not just passionate for the good cause, but very passionate for the good cause, right? Just to express your grief. And that was one thing when I read the book, I thought, oh, of course, as parents and host parents, you'd like to talk about things happening in the world and encourage your family to think critically about it. But why are we going so hard at it, right? And I think that explained to me a lot about it. That was really a revelation. And so the reverse culture shock and the attention for that and the grief piece.
I was going to piggyback as well on how the exchange student chooses. I mean, they get to go and they know it's a period of time and they know when they're going home. So there aren't any surprises like mom and dad saying, we're leaving in a month, you know, there's none of that. It just seems like a more clean, emotionally, maybe stable experience. This book made me think of a friend of mine that I met at my first job after college, and he was an Army brat, and we have stayed friends. And so he's now in his 60s. And as I was reading this book, I reached out to him and I wanted to talk to him about, you know, how he calls himself an Army brat, what all that was like, how many places did he live and stuff. And you know, he didn't want to talk about it. He just did not want to talk about it. And it just made me think that he's been scarred, that there's something negative about that. And certainly this book would help any of those parents thinking ahead on how to do those kinds of transfers from base to base, school to school, making friends, saying goodbye to friends. It just made me sad for him.
I think for me, as we're talking about the differences between like traditional TCKs and exchange students, I really like what folks have said before, like this distinction of them choosing to go, but also the age at which they go. So they have had the experience generally of having been able to form like this really concrete idea of home, and like the anchors and mirrors really spoke to me, that exchange students have an opportunity to be surrounded by anchors and mirrors in their community. And that community might shift, that, you know, that family might have moved a lot, but generally it's slightly more stable, because I also don't think a lot of traditional TCKs would necessarily choose to be an exchange student. And so it's students who are looking for that complexity and like their world to be rocked a little bit and to like change it up. But then I think also because the families aren't going with that student, the families aren't embroiled in the chaos as well. And so they have stable communities, like Chrisanne said, around them, both in the host community and the home community. And so I think what we can do is, if like we're community members, or as for North Star or for hosting clubs, is be really intentional about how we work with that student to ask them to step out of the chaos. One thing I found as a student on my exchange year is that it was really busy right before I left, either direction. So it was really busy right before I left. It was really busy right when I arrived. It was really busy right before I came home. It was really busy right when I got home. And so kind of slowing down those transitions. And I really love the idea, like in hindsight, I wish I as a student had like taken a day for myself and just gone hiking and just like hiked up to this viewpoint over Salzburg and like reflected on my year and went with a journal. And I didn't do that, you know. I was at parties with friends and with different host families, and just trying to introduce like more quiet into those transitions, because we have that to our advantage with our students.
Does the quiet, you think it would help someone just absorb it all, appreciate it all? I mean,
yeah, I think it would help with that unresolved grief. I really connected with that idea. I think it would allow them to enter and exit with more intention. So to think about everybody they want to say goodbye to have more like agency over the experience if they're given time to like craft out what they want that exit to look like, or like what that re-entry would look like. And it's hard to make those decisions for yourself if you're hearing it from everybody else. Oh, you must want to go say goodbye to this person. As soon as you get back, we're going to schedule like a 2-week road trip to visit all of your family members. You know, you must want that. You know, that, like, it's kind of hard to figure out what you want when you're hearing it from everybody else.
It's a concept I think we should bring up in orientations, though, to prepare students to think about that before they leave the States on their exchange, then before they return to the States.
Yeah.
Stephanie, there was one, Steph, I don't know if you read the book, but there was a section in the book about how someone, what was it? Their last day, they planned on packing their last day.
Oh, I love that story.
I know. They saw people all, you know, till the very end, but the last day they were going to pack, and they didn't realize they were in a culture where that last day, everyone they had ever met practically came to the house to say goodbye to them. And they had no time to pack. And Steph, did you remember that? I mean, in Brazil, that's what those Brazilians do too. I mean, they just
and that person missed their flight. Right?
Yeah. Well, we don't know.
Right. Well, you know, and it's interesting, all this conversation, because I went in, you know, thinking about third culture kids and exchange students, the thing that the word that came to mind about being an exchange student is the word control, that we have control over, you know, we made the choice. Yes, we want to do this, you know,
Mhm.
accepted first, right? And then we did this and we made the effort, and then we knew we were coming back, but you know, or I shouldn't say, but I should say, and it seems like when we greet students that have come back to Minnesota, the first thing that they say is, I can't wait to go back. You know, I'm already planning to go back in the summer. You know, they've got they have that opportunity. Whereas third culture kids, you know, someone said it earlier, they are following their parents. And I think that is really a big difference. And I do like the conversation that we just had around being intentional at the, you know, at the transition points, the exit, the return. And I think that's really important too, just to be able to really appreciate. And I don't know, maybe it's my older lens now, you know, compared to when I was, you know, 18, 19, maybe I wouldn't have thought that way. But now I think that slowing down and just really appreciating that would have been great. There was, I mean, packing, Chrisanne, I remember having, I mean, I'm sure y'all experience this too, you know, wearing the same clothes all year long. I was in a little town and I wasn't shopping and buying new clothes all the time. So kind of the same outfits all the time. Mm-hmm. And at the end I said, I'm not bringing back anything that I brought. So I just, you know, if anyone ever commented on a top I had, you know, they got it. So
yeah, that's great.
We were driving out of town that next morning. I don't think I slept that last night. We're driving out of town and we were a block off of the main road. So we go down that, you know, that typical way, and people knew I was leaving. I was the only, you know, only exchange student in town. And so people are waving goodbye and I'm just sobbing and I'm looking and I started laughing. They're all wearing what I gave them. And it was like this little parade of people waving to me. It's like, oh, I remember that too. You know, it was pretty funny.
Oh, that's great.
Oh,
the exit.
Kind of respectful stuff of you, you know. That's a loving thing that they did.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you know, you
well, it is.
Oh, well, you know what, I as you all did too, had an incredible year. And you know, we just so appreciate the people that were put in our way. You know, we were meant to be there and appreciated it.
I love the story in the book, or maybe it was a recommendation about maybe a month before you're leaving to just start to say to people, you know, you've made a difference in my year in this way. Of course, I'll see you before I leave, or maybe I won't see you, but I wanted to let you know that. This intentionality of recognizing people and almost doing a month of goodbyes. I don't think that's anything we ever recommend to the outbounds, either direction, you know, but I think then it doesn't boil down to that last day, or maybe you would feel a little more settled when you walked on the plane, or either direction. I really, really liked that idea. Resonated with me a lot.
I like the idea of oh, go ahead, Chrisanne.
I just want to say, this has been such a pleasant discussion.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you set the stage well. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I wonder if there's an opportunity, like I think about our inbounds, and if there's an opportunity to, I mean, in a normal year, but to gather them all like before, like that like cycle leaves, and you gather them at like the 7th month mark, just to say, hey, you're going to be leaving soon. Like, take this time to write letters to people that have, you know, had a positive experience, or, you know, I engage them in these conversations
early, yeah.
Like past the midpoint, but well before that last month.
At least historically, that has been done at the inbound weekends. You know, they do have several weekends a year when they get together, and we, you still say we, I'm not involved anymore, but at least they always used to have quite an extensive half day of this type of thing. What's going on now? How are you getting ready for to go?
Mm-hmm.
Have you learned how to write thank you notes? Here's how, you put an address in here, etc. So I think a lot of this is being done or has historically been
That's
done.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. And Olga, to your comment, I was amazed when I went to NIAN, the North American Youth Exchange Network. Thank you. How many districts, Rotary districts around the United States have nothing for coming home students.
Mm-hmm.
No rebound weekend, no get together with the Rotarians, nothing. And those poor kids, they go through the grief and all the other cycles they have of being cut off from their host country, which has become their home country, and to have to do it on their own. It's very, very tough. There are some people in North Star who think, well, rebound weekend isn't necessary. We don't need to do that anymore. And I think we can promote that very strongly with North Star. And by the way, and I'm just going to kick in because I toot the horn that I like to toot the most. The inbound weekends and the rebound weekend are primarily planned by and executed by Rotex, not by North Star Rotary.
Greg, we've talked about how Rotary is all about service, right? And how as an e-club, we're not at a particular community where, like Sandy, we can do a project to get a playground put in place, in one particular area where we're really scattered. And what does service mean to our club? I think this is something that the leadership committee would like to explore a little more, but one idea might be some sort of a rebound that's open to any kid anywhere from a district that might not have that support. I mean, what a service that would be to returning exchange students from South Dakota or from Utah, or it could be from the middle of New York City if they don't have any sort of returning program like that. I mean, we have the knowledge, we have the contacts, we have the students. Everything's over Zoom anyway. It might be an idea. We should explore it.
John, I think that's a great idea.
I love that idea.
I think that's great.
Right. In District 5610, where I used to belong and be a member, we typically had 5 or 6 outbounds and 5 or 6 inbounds per year anyway. It's not that you'd suddenly get 100 more.
Right.
But I don't know how it would work, because then there are those larger districts, and so South Dakota or 5610 would be part of SCRI.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if that would create any conflict, because geographically Marshall is Minnesota and is 5610 as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I was suggesting don't have it geographically bound in any way. Of course, if they have a rebound structure in place or some way of processing their year when they get back, that's great. But if they don't, that could be, let's think about that. That's
yeah.
Really good idea, John. Really good idea.
I love that
full program, and it would have been very helpful for all those students who did not have it. So, yeah.
I kind of want to hear back from the kids that were in Italy. Remember, then we talked to them early on when this club was starting. When one was going home early, one got to stay. It was just so emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder how they're doing.
Mm-hmm. It'd be fun to have them back for like a recap meeting a year later.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, a year later. I'm just thinking that's actually not so far off.
Oh.
So, good deal.
Great discussion.
Okay, anything else? Was someone going to say something? I was going to say, anything else on the list, or any other questions for the group?
We talked a lot about exchange students. I was just curious if there's other people or other populations that people interact with that they feel like there were some lessons in the book that applied to their interactions with that group. So for example, I used to tutor adult ESL learners here in Minneapolis. And I was thinking a lot about like what it means for the parents who are trying to support cross-cultural kids and maybe just don't have the time or the resources. And that maybe there were some things in like my conversations with them, or, you know, that I had unintentional, like, I don't know, just like curious about like when I would ask about their kids or things like that, you know, I could ask different questions.
It's an interesting topic that, yeah, was in the book, it was mentioned too. And I've had experience overseas as well as a teacher, since I used to teach in Rotterdam in the Port Harbor area, and very few students who would be born and raised by Dutch families. And so the children or the students would translate for the parents. And then here with the business and the employees all being immigrants, same story. So a little child would come into the office and said, my mom cannot milk cows today because she is sick or something. And so doing the translating, but more in school than at work, obviously. That work is typically doesn't require much of that, but it creates such a different role. And the book, it was so interesting that they mentioned how as a child you expect the support and the safety and the beacon, basically the direction from your parents, but that flips in those situations, right? Is that what you're mentioning? Or
yeah, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting. And then how do we deal with that, right? As neighbors or friends or teachers or whatever it is, because you want to be respectful and not bypass the adult because the child is the translator, or it's it's not very easy. No.
My next door neighbor, who right outside that window over there, outside my kitchen, the adults do not speak English. The college age kids speak both languages, and the grade school kids only speak English.
Oh, and wow.
I think to myself, gosh, can you imagine being a father or a mother and not having your young kids understand the language you're speaking? And the college age kids they seem to be doing very well, but they're going away to college. And so who's home to translate? It's tough.
The book had that example where sorry to cut you off, where that family spoke like elementary English at home.
Yep.
And the kids then didn't gain the linguistical skill, like they had to catch up basically later.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. It's very, and the adults next door do not want to interact with us who have English as our primary language and are also adults.
So as a teacher, I was trained in multilinguality because I came from the province of Friesland, which is a different language than Dutch. And so, and there they taught me in college, they told me that it is very good for parents to hold on to their primary language when they raise their children. So I think it's absolutely fine looking at that angle to do that, and that's what I've practiced as a parent myself, and it went very well, I think. Looking at how my children are now adults and how they are doing, but at the same time they did not have to translate for us as parents. And so there is that question, how does it impact those students or those children later in life, right? And did they really miss the direction from the parents because they had to be the translator, and culturally as well, not just the lingual part. So there's that question. I should open a bottle of wine, but I'm in the office. So
well, thanks for bringing that up. One of the things that 4 of us met just kind of club planning on Sunday, and one of the things we wanted to suggest is at the end of the meeting, anyone who wanted to hang out for a glass of wine could do so. So we could stop the meeting and then just kind of hang out. I think one thing that a lot of us are missing is just, you know, what I loved about today's meeting is we've been interacting way more than we normally. I mean, everybody has mute off for the most part, or is coming and going and off of mute, and it's been great. So yeah, so I say if people want to go hang out for a little bit, that's great. We're 10 minutes over.